Hi everybody, and welcome back to our fourth video. Up to this point, we've talked about nonprofit communication and what makes it different, and the value and importance of everyone in a nonprofit playing the role of communicator. And we've talked about common ways of reaching out that are free and effective, and how to craft a really good message across any platform, and how to use something called a communication plan, or to develop a communication plan that saves you time and maximizes your messaging. But now I want to pull all of that knowledge together to show you how to get up and running, or maybe consider rebooting the way that you think about reaching your different audiences. And by that I mean your list. Maybe the most important tool to have in message amplification. And in this video, we're going to break down different kinds of lists and the best practice for building and maintaining a robust and active list on your many different platforms. So, quick crash course. What is a list? Some might simply say that it's like a Rolodex. You remember that thing that used to sit on the desk and you'd kind of flip through it? It's, essentially contact information for people with whom you communicate. Okay, that's true, but what kind of contact information do you need to communicate with someone in 2020 versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Think about your list right now. If you needed to send an email to parents and teachers as allies about a special, COVID-19 mental health event that you're hosting, and you wanted to target parents and teachers who interact with teenagers who live in a certain zip code, could you do that? And if you could, how many of those contacts are actually up to date? Now, most of you probably could sit back and say, yeah, I could do that. Or some of you would go, no way, we can't get that specific. But either way, there's always room for improvement. And there's an old marketing expression that your campaign, your messaging is only as good as your list. Those who can reach you and you can reach them. In nonprofit marketing, having this reliable, up-to-date list is a huge ongoing challenge. And I think unlike for-profit businesses, organizations like Amazon and some of these other ones, you can't really just go out and buy a customer list. And that in the field of healthcare, the lists that you would want to get are often protected anyway for patient privacy, and they're really only available through the old-fashioned kind of way of having people opt in one at a time, which is fine, because list building is essentially like building a relationship. You can't buy it, and the most successful ones are often built over time, and they need to be tended to regularly. So there's some good news, and that's that the very complex art of list building today comes with a few shortcuts, I think, to get you up and running, pretty quickly. And even if you're refreshing an old list, which you should do yearly anyway, or you're putting together a list for the first time, the initial steps are the same. You want to ask yourself, what information do we need to know to be good at reaching our audiences? And when you think about communicating and list building in 2020, you have to think about basic contact information, but also further about things like demographics, psychographics, technographics, all of these graphics, right? All of this information that we need to collect now that goes beyond the basic things we used to need to collect, like a name and a phone number or a mailing address. But every contact should tell you now who that person is in a way that you can target them with the information that's most relevant to them on the platform that's most applicable to them. So, before we get into the conversation about how to get your list kind of up and running, know that list building, again, is this relationship. And at the center of this relationship is trust. And people want to trust that if they give you information, you're not going to contact them, for example, by phone, if they've stated that they never want to be contacted by phone. Or that you're not going to send them stuff in the mail. As maybe they live with somebody, a roommate or something, who's unaware of an individual struggle, and they don't want to be solicited through the mail in a way that somebody else could see that messaging. Or maybe it's the simple fact that you're reminding them, you're building trust and reminding them that you'll never share their contact information. So, please understand that people will only share with you the information they feel comfortable sharing. So it's up to you to explain why the information that they're sharing is good for you and good for them. The other thing to consider, of course, is privacy. I mean, obviously, medical information is considered private and protected. And you have to know what laws regulate this kind of information and how your organization handles that information before you even begin. But generally speaking, list building in 2020 means knowing more. So the first thought to kind of think about here in talking about list building is, where will you or where do you keep your list? Many organizations like NAMI have what are known as content management systems, or CMSs. Other people call them customer relationship management systems. We're just going to call them the list here. And organizations and health communities usually rely on lists that add a few extra layers, if you will, of encryption for privacy's sake. And in today's digital world, hacking headlines appear just about every week. So always consider the security of any list, service, or system that you're using. You never want to have a list in a place where the public can access it, for example, and you never want to have a list in a place that's not protected behind some sort of password system. Chances are you're probably using a system already that has password protection and encryption and embedding into a website or something where that data can be saved and not shared with the common public. But always think about how you're keeping your lists. Some list service management softwares, they're baked into other products. Like Constant Contact is probably one of the most popular. I'm not a spokesperson for Constant Contact, by the way, but it is one of the most popular, which is technically an email-based platform designed to help you send out email newsletters and specific emails to individuals. And on the back end of that software, they have a list. They have a place where you can store all of that content and that contact information so that when people opt out of your emails, for example, it removes them from the list. But there are others, so many that are out there right now that you can have, that you could buy as just a management software or that are coupled to another service. But my best advice is to always have an independent list, a freestanding service, if you can, so that you're free to shop around different email and text message and social media services, social media service providers. So if you have a relationship with an organization like Constant Contact, but you decide to switch to, MailChimp, or maybe you decide that you want to embrace text messaging and MailChimp doesn't do that, or your current CRM isn't doing everything that you want it to do, you always have the ability to offload that list and keep it as your own, where you can put it into different services, if possible. So the other thing to consider, because we've talked about kind of the technical what is a list, but understand that there really is no such thing as just one list. And what I mean by that is that we communicate with so many different kinds of people. And the things we say to those different groups are also very different, especially when you think back to the workshop we had on messaging that targets individuals. Your lists should be able to do that. So there's really no such thing as a general list. And so for the sake of simplicity, break your content management system down into at least 3 buckets if you can. More if you really get into it, but at least 3 buckets or 3 categories to help manage those different kinds of audiences. For example, your first list could be your target audience. And maybe you define that as people who benefit directly from your services. Maybe they benefit directly or even indirectly. You might have allies in there, for example. Maybe the other list, the other bucket that you maintain in your CRM are community partners and healthcare partners. This could also include things like sponsors and donors, or maybe donors are their own list. Another list to consider that maybe you haven't is one that's just for local media. We talked about earned media and how you want to try and build relationships with journalists and possibly get stories about the organization runs so that people can learn about you. That list is going to look very different than possibly your target list. Now, I don't want to confuse things, but while each of these are important, there's also going to be some overlap, obviously, as a major donor could also be a major donor because they have directly benefited or are directly benefiting from your services. And who's to say a journalist that's on your media list can't also be affected by a mental health condition and want to benefit from the services? So you can have people in different parts, but the best idea is thinking about the kinds of messaging that you send out. You want to be able to segment your audiences on your list appropriately. So let's talk about the basics of lists. There's a basic checklist, if you will. And when you think about the most basic things that you want to know about your audiences, it's really going to depend on what it is that you do and who it is that you're communicating with. So let's say, for example, probably the most common thing you'll see on just about any list is someone's name. But also, you should ask them, how do they define their relationship with your organization? As in, is this somebody who's related to the organization because they're an ally? Or are they hoping to participate in some sort of a treatment or a program? Are they part of local media? Are they interested in donating? You can kind of start the process of identifying what list they should be on by knowing a little bit more about how they relate to your organization. Now, beyond the basics, there are a couple of categories now that marketers use to try and break their audiences, their list out even more. And one of those considerations is something known as geographics or demographics. And those are two separate categories, but for the sake of this, I'll put them together. And it essentially means, what is that person's age? Maybe should we know information about their race or nationality? Do we need to know information related to their biology that make them important to contact with specific services or programs? Maybe information related to family history of a mental health condition or substance abuse. Geographically speaking, do we need to know where exactly they live? Do we need their address? Do we need to know via a zip code? Maybe we're not doing a mailing campaign, but we need to know that they're in a certain part of town, which could be important if we're hosting an in-person event or a walk or a drive. There's another category, and a kind of newer category that marketers think about with their lists, known as psychographics. Now, this comes out of tried and true marketing of products more so than anything else, but psychographics refer to how to segment people based on their thoughts or their attitudes, their belief systems, their lifestyle and behaviors, maybe information about what interests them, the familial makeup, healthcare factors that they're willing to share, that are ones that might relate to a service that they might be interested in. Maybe it lets us know if it's a child or a family member, or it's somebody who's acting on behalf of a more familial circle. But psychographics are a great place to allow someone to sign up for certain programs and services by telling us a little bit more about themselves and what they're seeking to find having this relationship with the organization. The last category I want you to think about, it's kind of a newer one, again, when it comes to marketing lists circa 2020, is something known as technographics. Now, it's just as important to know if one of your folks on your list is on Facebook, or if they're on Instagram, or if they're not on Facebook or they're not on Instagram. It's important to know how much time maybe they spend on Facebook or Instagram, or if they prefer to get communication over email. Going back to maybe one of the other points made in another video, technographics are a great time to know what access to the internet they have or don't. For example, maybe they state that you can reach them via email, but they're not on any social platforms. Or maybe they're on a ton of social platforms, but you'll never reach them via email because they either don't want to subscribe to that, or maybe they don't have email. And again, maybe they don't have the internet. So technographics allow you to know what capabilities you have of reaching your audiences on different kinds of technology-based platforms. Now, if your head is swimming thinking about all of this information, just know that you could go on and on and on. In the era of big data, One could argue that the more data you have, the better. But I want you to think about simply what's the most important information that you need to have for your communication efforts. What are you most likely to need to know from your audiences in order to be able to communicate with them effectively? And if you're not capable of launching a phone tree or a text message campaign, then maybe you don't need to ask them if they want to be contacted in that manner or allow them to subscribe to that because that feature is not available. So think about what makes sense for you as far as those categories are concerned and what information that you actually need to know. Think about how you communicate and what is most important to you, and just know all of the different options that are out there for people to be able to tell you about themselves. So with all of these different options available for collecting information for our list, how do you know that you've built a good one at the end of the day? And I think whether you've already got a list of 15,000 contacts, or maybe you've just got a couple of emails that you have saved in your sort of email contact database, list building is always broken down into two parts. You want to talk about constantly adding to the list, but also cleaning up old contacts. Because when we say building a list, it's sort of like fostering a relationship of data that over time, if you don't manage, starts to decay. So if you're interested in adding new contacts to your list, which is probably what a lot of you are very interested in doing, right? Sort of adding more contacts so that you can have new recipients of services, donors, etc. But maybe you don't know where to start because it's a lofty sort of process, list building. Most marketers would recommend that you start what's known as a referral campaign. And that's exactly what it sounds like. And what you do in a referral campaign is you utilize any current contacts that you currently have to help spread the word for you. In fact, some nonprofit marketers state that 70% of new contacts come by way of referral from existing clients, customers, and partners that they have. So keep in mind that referral campaigns are great, especially in for-profit, when somebody's got, a plumber that they want to recommend. That's commonly where we hear about it, this word of mouth sort of referral. But, in the nature and state of healthcare services, especially as they relate to things like mental health conditions and mental illness, that might come with a certain amount of advocacy, folks that want to advocate saying that somebody should seek out NAMI services, or maybe they advocate they themselves have benefited from it. But you also have to remember referral campaigns in healthcare need to be handled delicately. And while most referral campaigns are incentivized, in the for-profit world with like fancy giveaways, if we reach 10,000 subscribers, we'll give away an Apple Watch or something, social media contests too. For industries like this, in healthcare that have to be handled delicately, where referrals are going to be handled person to person, signups may take time, and they may take a person seeing, a new person seeing a message or having that referral passed to them a few times before they start relating to it. And then guess what they're going to do? They're going to go do a ton of research to validate your organization before they start the process of signing up. And for that reason, and to start a referral campaign, you want to make sure that you have your website and your contact information as up to date as possible. You want to make sure your website is set up in a way that new people can opt in or sign up easily. They need to be able to get to a place where they can fill in their own information without having to give it to someone else, right? Because maybe they like the privacy of being able to sign up, sort of confidentially. And this means taking signups through an online form that's protected, or maybe it's tied directly to your content management system that you create. But either way, before you start the referral campaign and understanding how delicately these kind of referrals need to happen, you want to make sure you're as buttoned up as you can be in all of the places where someone can learn about you and then take that action of signing up. So make sure that your sign up button is everywhere that your messaging is. And it's easy for someone to take those buttons or those links and forward them on to other people that they think are interested. This means that on your website, you should have a sign up button that's clearly placed and simply states what it does. And a lot of organizations have found it to be a best practice to put their sign up button at the top of their about page and at the top of several pages, if not in the masthead or the banner, if you will, at the top of your website, so that it's there no matter what page that they're clicking on. But it should be placed somewhere where it's very clear that they're signing up and it's simple for them to access. And of course, at the top of all of your social media channels, you have the ability to add sign-up information, which is a matter of configuring the top of your Facebook business page to have a sign-up button. You can add a link in your bio on Instagram that goes directly to your sign-up button or to your homepage if that's where your sign-up button is. The same thing is true on Twitter. Your print materials, so any sort of posters and flyers, business cards, these sorts of things, should all have instructions for signing up with a simple set of sort of how to sign up that even like an 8th grader could follow. And that's a best practice for communication, by the way, is just make it simple and clear. Another thing to consider in your forward campaign and having everything sort of connected to that sign up is your email signature line. That should have a hyperlinked button that goes directly to your sign up form for your list. And you should have a well-prepared sign-up sheet that's printed out for tabling events for folks who don't have access to things like email or social or the web. And you should think about how a person could sign up if they decided to over the phone with you or a member of your staff. If they don't have access to the internet or they want to be more private about their opt-in and they don't want a paper trail or an email trail, give them that capability. Be able to collect signups everywhere. And again, add a forward button to all of your existing emails to ensure that current members can easily share the messages onto a friend or a family member or a work colleague or anybody that they think might benefit from knowing about you and your organization. Another great thing to think about in a referral campaign and thinking about reaching new members is hosting interest events that are online. We talked about the fact that somebody might need to see your message a few times before they decide to sign up. And maybe somebody's not sure if they want to sign up yet to start receiving information or to join a program. But if you did something like hosted an interest event, online, and found some way to make it sort of private where people couldn't see each other in the event, or maybe it's a one-directional sort of a webinar where you open yourself up at the end for a Q&A, but you collect RSVP data so that you can have a way of following up with those individuals who might have questions or to ask them if they have questions. Another great thing to think about with referrals are community partners. They help spread the word about your organization on their channels. Remember back to that sponsored part of the previous workshop. And many organizations choose to partner with nonprofits during special weeks or months or holidays, etc., to get the word out to their employees. And a co-sponsored month building awareness about the organization where employees and customers of that organization can share the sign-up link can really go a long way beyond reaching people through traditional means. But most importantly, I think out of all of that, and maybe you heard some things that would definitely work for you and maybe you heard some things that wouldn't, but no matter what, you should ask people in your current membership to pass your information along to anyone they think might benefit from the services that your organization provides, and ask people to help you reach new people. Put it in your talk track at the end of every single meeting, at the end of every single conversation, and tie it into the messages dedicated to referring new members. And there's this long-standing rule in marketing that says a person has to see your message, 7 times before it sticks, and they take some kind of an action. And make sure that when you're asking people to refer your messaging forward, that you're giving them different ways of doing it. You're mixing up your ask for referrals through a variety of those owned, earned, shared, sponsored channels. And remember to keep sensitivity and confidentiality at the forefront, but find a way to turn current members into ambassadors who will refer your organization forward. Now, let's assume that you've got a really good response to a referral campaign. It, just had great success. And you've done some really good promotional efforts, and you've got a really robust list. You know that even the best lists degrade over time. And statistically, it's assumed that in sales especially, lists can degrade as much as 22% per year. You're talking about a quarter of the contact information that's in your list becomes invalid yearly. So if you're not managing your list, if you're not updating your list regularly, it is literally starting to erode over time to a point where maybe it's 22% one year and then you're at 44%, or you get all the way up to 60 very quickly. You want to make sure that you're managing your contact information, because contact information changes. Sometimes people no longer require your messages for a whole host of reasons. But one of the biggest drivers of list decay is what's known as opt-out. And that's when someone decides that they no longer wish to receive your messaging. Now, for someone benefiting from a program, this could be for another group of reasons, but for an ally, for example, or a sponsor, it might mean that you're over-communicating with them. Or perhaps you're giving them information that's not relevant to them. And for that reason, they start to see your messaging as more spam than useful. And for that reason, there are a few things that you can do to keep your opt-outs to a minimum and keep your list building in the positive. The first thing to think about when you talk about your messaging strategy and communicating with your list is what's called the 80-20 rule. And really, that just states that 80% of the information you pass along to your list should be helpful or useful to them in some capacity. It should be something that they're interested in receiving. It should be something that they want to engage with. That means that 20% of the content that you pass along should be sort of promotional in nature. That is, asking them to do something about that 80% of information that you've given them. And that could be asking for donations, or perhaps asking them to join a 10K or an awareness walk. But you have to think about that when you're writing and constructing your messaging in your emails, and then how you can relate that messaging to your different audiences that are on your list. And to that point, maybe the second most important thing to think about is connecting your messages to your audience through something called hypersegmentation. And really, that's just a big word for making sure that the right people are getting the right message. Remember my hypothetical from earlier, if you could sort your email list to only reach moms of teenagers or allies who interact with teenagers for a special webinar or community event, they're more likely to respond if you can do that, the moms or the allies, because that message is designed for them. If we simply took our list, a major generic list, and we blasted out that message, after a while of seeing those kind of messages that are not segmented, that are not specific, folks without teenagers who weren't, supposed to receive that message, they would stop wanting to receive that message. They would opt out of your email. And, the thing about especially email opt-outs is, one, you have to allow people to opt out. And almost all email service providers have that built in, where somebody just clicks one button and then they're gone forever. And legally, you have to allow them to do that. I think within 7 days, you have to honor that. So you want to make sure that your audiences are receiving that specific message, that you're not overburdening them with messages that are not specific to them. Otherwise, they'll opt out. They will mark it as spam. Their email will mark it as spam, and they'll remove themselves from your list. And the last thing to think about with regard to making sure that your list stays robust and you don't have a lot of opt-outs is by watching your data. You can keep an eye on things, your data on the back end of your CMS. If you're using Constant Contact, or maybe you're using another specific software, they almost always tell you critical things about what's happening to your data on the back end. Most will tell you how many people open an email that you send out, for example, or how many people opted out within the last month. Some of the social media content management software services will tell you how many people liked, engaged, they shared your message. And you want to keep an eye on this data because you want to look for trends. Are more people opting out, for example, to the newsletter, but are opting in on social media? And if that's the case, maybe you're over communicating through email, or vice versa. Maybe you're not communicating enough on social media. You're breaking that 80-20 rule that I talked about earlier. So look at your data. Always keep an eye on your data and consider adjusting your messaging or your frequency to ensure that people aren't just opting out of your list. And talking about, looking at your data and managing your list, the last thing to consider is how to maximize the folks that have opted into your list, that are on your list with a particular channel. And this is a great way to grow more people on your list. And for example, Pew Research put out some data recently that shows how people today prefer to be contacted. This is critical information for somebody that's trying to grow a list, is knowing how the majority of people want to be contacted, when they want to be contacted, on what social channel you could find. For example, a mother who's over the age of 55, she's likely going to be on Facebook, but she's not going to be on, TikTok. So I'm going to pass along some of that data so that you can look at it to understand where you might want to focus some of your efforts to build your list, and where you're more likely to find folks on particular platforms for the sake of building your list. So I'll pass that along with this video, and that's it. Thanks for watching.